Scott, thanks very much. And Dr. Fauci, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, everybody wants to hear your opinion on the data from the Moderna coronavirus vaccine trial, the early data we saw this week. You said you're cautiously optimistic. Tell us about your reflections on that data.
Well, as you know, when you do a vaccine trial, there are various landmarks along the trial that could actually derail it at any given time. The first that we saw was we went into a phase 1 trial very quickly, really with record speed. And we did it with 3 doses. And the first thing you look at is it's safe. Clearly it was. But the important issue is it inducing the kind of response that you would predict would be protective. So when the company and our investigators looked at the data in the first 2 doses of the phase 1 study in normal volunteers, we found something that was really quite encouraging, in that the immunizations induced not only antibody in general, but neutralizing antibody. And for people to understand what that means, if this were the virus here, it means if this were the virus here, and you had an antibody that bound to one part, it would bind like maybe to this part here, which is not neutralizing because the business end of the virus is here. So the antibodies that were induced were ones that actually block the component of the virus that binds to your cells. That's really good news, because not only is it the right antibody, but the titer of the antibody that was induced was really very good with the standpoint of what you predict might be protective. So even though it's a small number of individuals and it's the first step in a multi-step process, it was still very encouraging. We still have a long way to go, obviously. There are so many things that need to be done. We're going to go quickly into a phase 3 trial, probably in the beginning of the summer, sometime in July. And then the proof of the pudding will be, is it effective? Namely, does it really protect against infection? But the first stage has really been encouraging.
And the data you're talking about, the neutralizing antibodies, there were only 8 people's worth of data available on neutralizing antibodies as of this cut of the data. And all 8 did show those antibodies. Can you tell us any more about those people? You know, some folks pointed out if they were young, relatively, healthy, robust people, that might be different than if they were older folks.
Yeah, I mean, the phase 1 trial has certain constraints in it that you have to get it if you really want to do a phase 1 trial properly with young, relatively, more than relatively, but to all appearances, quite healthy individuals. So they were individuals from the age of 18 to 55. I can't tell you what the age was of the individual people there, but it was within that range of 18 to 55 years old. As we go further in the study, we'll be doing older individuals, and then we'll be doing children, and then we'll be doing other subpopulations. But the first shot at the phase 1 were individuals who were young and otherwise healthy.
And this data from Moderna wasn't the only vaccine data we've seen in the last week. We've seen some animal data from the Oxford-AstraZeneca trial. We just saw data published in The Lancet from CanSino Biologics out of China from a human phase 1 trial. All of that combined, how has your confidence level changed this week, if at all, that we will have a successful vaccine for COVID-19?
Well, whenever you're dealing with vaccines, you've always really got to be conservative about it, because the history of vaccinology is one that is punctuated by as many failures as that there are successes. But we have what I call multiple shots on goal. It isn't just one candidate. The one I mentioned was Moderna, but by no means are they alone. There's the Oxford chimp ad that we spoke about, that you just mentioned. And then there are a number of other companies that are in various stages of development, and they will be going into phase 1 trial in a staggered way sometime as we get into the mid and late summer. That's a good thing. The United States government, my institute that I direct, is going to be involved one way or another, directly or indirectly, facilitating many of those trials, either by getting and allowing our clinical trial sites and the apparatus that we set up over many years to make it available to these companies. So I'm always cautiously optimistic when I see a number of companies that are really quite good. They have a good track record. You have the backing of the federal government, and the early results look encouraging. Again, I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but those are the kind of things that make me feel cautiously optimistic that within that time frame that I've spoken, that we will have a safe and effective vaccine with no guarantees, because again, you never know if it's going to work or not, but we have some cautious optimism.
And these timelines, of course, are faster than pretty much anything we've ever seen in history. So that being said, what threshold are you looking for in terms of how much information is needed on efficacy and on safety for, you're not the regulator, but the regulators will require to approve these vaccines?
Well, I mean, the benchmarks and the things that you're looking for, obviously, is you want an efficacy signal. I mean, the studies that have been designed are randomized placebo-controlled trials in which you look at the vaccinated versus unvaccinated and you see if you get an efficacy signal. We're going to be doing a lot of people, and in each arm of a trial, you can have, tens of thousands of people, anywhere from 10, 15, 20, 30,000 people per arm of a trial. And in fact, if you do that, hopefully that you'll get enough information quickly enough that you'll be able to make a determination not only of the safety, but of the efficacy of this. And the sooner we do it, the better. One of the things that I do want to bring up is the reason we're able to do this more quickly than we've done in other situations without compromising safety and without compromising the scientific integrity of the study is that we're doing things at risk. In other words, rather than the standard way of you go from step one and you don't make an investment for the next until you're sure of the step one, then you get to step two, you don't prepare sites, you don't start making enough doses until you know it works. When you proceed at risk, you make the financial investment assuming that you're going to be successful. So when we say at risk, we don't mean at risk to the patient. We mean at risk to the financial investment, so that it could be that if you're not successful, you made major investment in resources that you may not be able to recover. Whereas if you are successful, those investments that you made in the resources to produce and to prepare sites actually will put you months ahead of where you normally would be. So I want to make sure that the public understands when we talk about that, we're not compromising any safety, nor are we compromising the scientific integrity of the study.
Dr. Fauci, it's Scott Wapner. I'd like to welcome you to our program today. It is nice to see you. Is there a likelihood that we could have more than one vaccine ready at the same time? And how would you handle that?
Well, I only wish that we have more than one vaccine that's ready and available at the same time. As I said, we are going to do a number of trials with a number of candidates. Other countries, other groups may be doing even more than that. I'm sure that they are. That's what I mean by multiple shots on goal. So you would want more than one candidate that's effective. What you'd like to be able to do is that in your vaccine trials, you'll have a vaccine that might be more suited for young, healthy people, a vaccine that might be more suited for individuals who are in risk categories, such as age and underlying condition. But as far as I'm concerned, the more the merrier. And if we get an approved, safe, and effective more than one vaccine, that would be wonderful, not only for our own country, but for the availability of these vaccines for the rest of the world.
Are you comfortable, Dr. Fauci, at the pace in which the Moderna news was released publicly, given it's such a small study and so early in the trials?
Well, that's what companies do when they have an interim look at the data. They're enthusiastic about it, so they make it public. The ultimate data, of which people in my institute and group have been involved in the scientific aspects of that, when that data is complete and examined carefully, that will be submitted for a peer-reviewed publication, which everyone can look at. So that I'm very comfortable with, that ultimately, and sooner rather than later, everyone and anyone can take a look at the data and evaluate it.
You know, there's a growing debate, Dr. Fauci, in this country about the pace and progress of reopening. And I'd like to read you today a tweet from the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, and get your reaction to it if I could. He tweeted a little bit earlier today, quote, "Hospitals are not overwhelmed. Most of us will be exposed anyway since we can't sequester until there's a vaccine, and we know which groups need protection from the worst outcomes. Is the public health benefit from broad lockdowns at this point worth such extreme damage to livelihoods?" There are also people who argue for herd immunity. How do you address what Mr. Blankfein is saying today and what others have said in the past days, that it's just time to open this country up, Dr. Fauci, and protect the most vulnerable?
Well, A, I have no disagreement. We must protect the most vulnerable. And B, yes, depending upon the dynamics of the infection in the particular state, city, region, county that you're in, we certainly want to, in a cautious way, reopening. We can't stay locked down for such a considerable period of time that you might do irreparable damage and have unintended consequences, including consequences for health. And it's for that reason why the guidelines are being put forth so that the states and the cities can start to re-enter and reopen. So we are enthusiastic about reopening. And I think we can do it in a pace that would be reasonable and that would get us back as a society from a morale standpoint, as well as the economy. I don't want people to think that any of us feel that staying locked down for a prolonged period of time is the way to go. We had to do that when we had the explosion of cases, but now is the time, depending upon where you are and what your situation is to begin to seriously looking at reopening the economy, reopening the country to try and get back to some degree of normal. I'm totally in favor of that, if done in the proper way, in the appropriate setting.
There are areas of the country, though, Dr. Fauci, that are opening even though their cases continue to rise. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, you know, I've been very clear that I have concerns if cases are continuing to go up and you're actually jumping over some of the benchmarks that we put in the recommendations. If states and cities and counties are going to do that, no matter what, I would recommend that they take very significant precautions in doing that. And there are certain things that you can do. The idea about physical separation, about wearing a mask, about not getting involved in crowds, you can still proceed to open so long as you do those fundamental baseline things. But in general, I think most of the country is doing it in a prudent way. There are obviously some situations where people might be jumping over that. I just say, please proceed with caution if you're going to do that.
Dr. Fauci, I want to ask your thoughts. We've talked a lot about vaccines, but on therapeutics, there are a lot in the pipeline heading toward clinical trials. What are you most optimistic for when you look at the drug landscape for COVID-19?
Well, the drug landscape, as you might imagine, is different from the vaccine landscape. You know, there was a clinical trial with a drug called remdesivir in hospitalized individuals who had lung involvement. So it was a special group of people who were in the hospital and had documented lung involvement. And the study, which was the first actual placebo-controlled trial of almost 1,100 individuals, showed that there was an advantage of remdesivir in diminishing the time it took to recovery. It was significant from a statistical standpoint, but the effect was modest. It was about a 31% diminution in the time to recovery. We can build on that. There are a number of drugs, the antivirals, that have been developed for other infections that can be repurposed. The things that we are looking at very carefully is the use of convalescent plasma, namely taking the plasma from an individual who's been infected and recovered and passively transferring that to an individual who is infected, or to prevent infection. There's hyperimmune globulin. There's monoclonal antibodies. There's therapies against parts of the disease that we didn't fully recognize until relatively recently. like the microthrombi, or these little clots that we're seeing in the lungs and in other organ systems. So things like platelet inhibitors or anticoagulants are being considered. Things of dampening down excessive inflammation are being considered. There are many things right now that are in various stages of trial. Hopefully, we'll be able to get one or two or more of these, which will show to be quite effective.
And Dr. Fauci, we know that you need to get on with some other things, so I'll just ask you one last question. All of us are feeling a lot of stress right now. It's a hard time, and we know that you personally are working incredibly long hours and reading that you're perhaps not getting very much sleep. So we just wanted to ask, how are you personally holding up through all of this?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm actually doing fine. I'm trying to pace myself to the extent. I mean, we have clearly 18, 19-hour days, but that's what we do. I mean, that's the job I have, and I willingly accept it. Other than that, I'm actually doing fine. I could use a little bit more sleep, but then again, a lot of people could use a little bit more sleep. But we're in a situation right now that's so important that I'll worry about catching up on sleep at a later time.
Well, Dr. Fauci, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you for being with us.
It's good to be with you. Thank you for having me.